Welcome to Conversations. This is your host, Michael Stone, and I am thrilled to have Lynne McTaggart with me today. She's one of the central authorities on the new science of consciousness, and she's an award-winning author of 7 books, including the international best-selling The Intention Experiment and The Field. She's also editorial director of What Doctors Don't Tell Us, one of the world's most respected health magazines, and architect of The Intention Experiments, which is a web-based global laboratory. Highly sought after public speaker, Lynne is consistently listed as one of the world's 100 most spiritually influential people. And today we're going to be talking about her latest book, The Power of 8, Harnessing the Miraculous Energies of a Small Group to Heal Others, Your Life, and the World. Lynne, welcome to Conversations.
Thank you. It's great to be with you, Michael.
So been looking to have a full show with you, and it was great to get a little taste, but we can really get into things today. And one of the things I wanted to really start with was the whole question of what is intention. You know, sometimes we think it's something about will, or I'm going to make, you know, this new car, or I'm going to make myself win the lottery or something. Let's talk about what it is.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what it's not first. A lot of people think of intention as a power thought. Something like secular prayer, then a little request out there to the universe. And that is true to some degree. The only thing I want to have everyone consider is that we are beaming out our thoughts 24/7. The science shows us that thoughts are trespassers. They can get into other people and things and influence them. And I've got loads of experimental evidence for that. And I've gathered loads of experimental evidence that other people have done. So if our thoughts are beaming out all the time, we think of intention as, the power thought we have in the morning. Let's say we do our meditation, we have our power thought, and we think that's the only thing the universe hears. But we are sending out, if we're beaming and we're a television transmitter all the time, every last thought we have, all of our judgments we hold, all of the flotsam and jetsam going through our heads all day long, every last mendacious thought, all of that is an intention too. And that essentially becomes our life's intention. So one of the things I teach is always about being consistent in what you're thinking, getting conscious of what you're thinking and starting to be consistent with it. So an intention can be carried on all day long, but getting back to what it is, yes, a kind of form, it's a secular form of prayer in the sense that it's a very specific request to the universe. And prayer is usually a total surrender. We surrender to a higher power. We say, thy will be done. Well, this is a little bit different. This is saying, well, actually, I'd really like this. In the other sense, it's you decide, and this is what I'd like to decide to do or to have or to be. But, that doesn't mean the universe doesn't provide it to us in a very different way from what we've thought. But it is putting that just very specific request in.
I think one of the most startling things, and we're going to get more into the experiments and how to do them and everything, but to me, the thing that really gets my attention is when we have an intention for a healing, either individually or in a group to others, it actually magnifies our own goodness, things coming to us. Can you talk about that? That's just, I think, wonderful. And I don't think you can do it in order to have that. I think it's just the result of.
Yeah, I mean, that was the most startling thing to me about running these intention experiments and then running my Power of 8 groups. I started out running massive intention experiments, essentially to try to figure out how far we can take this thoughts are things that affect other things idea. There had been a lot of scientific evidence showing this whole thing of thoughts being trespassers and thoughts being something that can affect something else. So the journalist in me wanted to know, how far can we go with this? Can we cure cancer with our thoughts? What can we do with this? And also, what happens when lots of people are thinking the same thought at the same time? Does that magnify the effect? So I decided to put this to the ultimate test. I knew a lot of giants in this field, scientists at prestigious universities who were doing consciousness research. And I also had lots of readers around the globe. My books are in 30 languages. So I thought if I can just put them together, I'll have the biggest global laboratory in the world. So that's what I did. And I had them set up specific intention experiments that would be well-controlled studies of, first we started out with leaves and seeds, trying to make them grow faster or change certain properties of them. And then we went on to trying to purify water by moving the pH to become more alkaline, and trying a bunch of water experiments. And then we went on to trying to lower violence in war-torn areas and trying to heal individuals. And of the 30 experiments we've run, 26 have shown measurable, positive, mostly significant effects. There's no pharmaceutical drug out there with that kind of good track record. But as you say, getting back to your question, what was astounding to me wasn't just the effect on the targets, the effect on the participants themselves. I first discovered this mirror effect with a peace intention experiment in 2008. And I found that the people doing the intending for peace in Sri Lanka, as it turned out, were also getting affected. They were having more peace in their lives. They were making up with long estranged relatives. They were getting along better with their not so nice bosses. They were, they were falling in love with everybody they came in contact with. They were basically hugging strangers. And I was absolutely blown away by this. Then I started seeing it over and over again. Every time I do intention experiments, I survey the participants and say, how was it for you? Are there any other effects you've had, et cetera, et cetera? And I got back thousands of responses like that, where people were creating peace in their lives and were having some healings. And then when the focus was specifically on healing someone, we had thousands of people report, oh, I have terrible asthma in my knee. It doesn't hurt me anymore. My migraines are gone. I always have a bad digestion and it's all cleared up, and on and on and on and on like this. So I found it like that, and also found it in experimenting with small groups. I wanted to try to figure out how to bring intention to a workshop, again in 2008. And I hadn't run many workshops before at that time, so I wasn't really sure what to do. How do you get people to manifest something over a weekend workshop? So I thought, oh, well, I'm talking about it with my husband one day, and I go, I don't know, maybe I'll put them in groups of 8 or something and have them send intention to somebody with a health challenge. And he's a really good headline writer. He's a journalist also. And he goes, yeah, I love it. The power of 8. So I do this. We do it on this weekend workshop. I have no precedent for this, small group circles. So I'm just starting to make, I know a lot about how to do intention from looking at everything from the science to working with intention masters. But in terms of group intention, there was no precedent for it. So I'm telling them, well, you got to hold hands. It's got to be in the circle. You have to send intention all together, the same intention statement. I'm essentially making it all up as I go along. And I figure it's going to be a bit like a facial. It's going to feel pleasant and nice and relaxing. So I asked the people who were the intention targets to come back the next day. They line up, they take the mic, and one by one they say things like, I've had a terrible arthritic hip that's hurt me for many years and it doesn't hurt anymore and I can walk normally. I had cataracts in one eye and it's about 80% better. And, I've had terrible migraines and they're completely gone. And, on and on and on it went for an hour. And I dismissed it at the time as a placebo effect. But in all the workshops I've run, hundreds and hundreds now later, it's happened. Mm-hmm. And what was also interesting to me that kind of blew away the whole idea of a placebo effect is that many of the senders got healed too. And that was the extraordinary thing. That was the mirror effect again. I mean, I had a guy about a month or so ago called Wes, had a terrible story. He's 65 now, and he was planning to be a scientist. And he was at universities in his third year, and he gets drafted. And it was the last year of the Vietnam War where there were no more deferments for college. So he had to go. And it was so traumatizing for him. He came back really depressed. He didn't finish his college education. And his life just went in a downward spiral from there on in. He had a lot of bouts of depression. And the one little bright spark in his life was his second wife, except she got cancer, very fast moving cancer. She died. He ended up with these ridiculous, not only heartbroken, but with terrible, terrible debts because of her medical bills, and was, driving long distance truck to pay for it. It was just a terrible story. And he got to the point now where it was, what's the use? What's the use? It was hard for him to even get up in the morning and make himself breakfast. And he participated in a group that I had for the Mile High Church in Denver, a few intention groups. And he reported back a few days later that his entire outlook and everything had changed. He felt extraordinarily rejuvenated. It was like the grass was greener than it ever had been, and the flowers smelled better than they ever had. And suddenly he was able to bound out of bed with all kinds of energy to, easily handle what was so difficult before. And before long, he wrote to me to say, I'm doing 90-minute power walks and nothing is hurting. And, and I'm lifting weights. And I even had a dream where I met my 19-year-old self. And essentially he said to me, there's still time. And now he's back, he's writing a book, he's doing all kinds of stuff. And suddenly his life has completely changed. And he was not the subject. Remember, he was just a sender for someone with cancer. But he sent it with a heartfelt thought. And that is also what you said. No, it doesn't work if you're doing it just to get. It happens because you've the readiness to give, the selfless readiness to give.
Lynn, one of the things I love about your work that for me really distinguish it is the really hardcore science that you've brought to the measurement and the looking at it. There's so many things like The Secret or things, all these Think and Go Rich kind of programs that are really nauseating for someone who's been in the field for a while. But you really have brought rigor to it. And so when you talk about, say, Sri Lanka, or, maybe talk about the one we just finished, the peace experiment in Jerusalem. And I'm wondering, the reason I think of that is because your statistics may have been thrown off by suddenly in the middle of it, Trump decides to put the embassy there and declare it the capital. I mean, that could ruffle a lot of feathers. I don't know how much feedback you've gotten yet, but talk about the structure so that people know that these experiments are rigorous.
Okay. Well, for the peace intention experiment, we've run about 5 peace intention experiments thus far. And most of the time we do them for 6 to 8 days. So we have we have a little slot every day where it's about a 10 to 15 minute window every day. And I have various scientists. I have a whole scientific team who are measuring the results. We look at whether there's a field effect. That's measured by the Global Consciousness Project, Dr. Roger Nelson, ex of Princeton University, who created this program where random event generators are continuously running around the globe. Now, these REG machines are like electronic tosses of the coin. They're only able to have one of 2 outputs, either heads or tails, let's say. And because they're random, when they run, they have pretty much 50% heads and 50% tails. That's what happens. So what Dr. Nelson has been doing that's so ingenious is because this data is continuously coming in to a computer central, he looks at it time-wise against moments of global calamity or global joy. So for instance, he looked at the machines and their output during the Twin Towers disaster, the attack. And he found the machines veered hugely off their random course, and they had more heads than tails, or tails than heads. Anything like that indicates some sort of move away from randomness to order. So he's seen that. He's seen it in moments of joy, like the turn of the millennium. Other things like the death of Princess Diana, or certain reactions to, like, the Afghanistan war and the Iraqi war. The machines, if there was a particular event, the machines veered off their random course. Anytime lots of people around the world are reacting with joy or collective horror, machines go off their random course. So we've looked at it with all of our peace intention experiments, including the most recent one, the Middle Eastern peace intention experiment. And those machines always go off their random course just at the point where we're doing our intention. And they have the same signature. It's actually more tails than heads. And each time, exactly the same. And so we look at that field effect. We also look at the statistics of it. And now, for, say, the Sri Lanka experiment, I worked with Dr. Jessica Utz, who's also going to be working on, I had an American peace intention experiment and the Jerusalem one we may look at too. What she does is she asked me for 2 years worth of injuries and deaths prior to our experiment, and then several months afterward. And the reason she does that is this. Let's say violence just goes down the week after the experiment. That doesn't show anything, not scientifically. That could be total coincidence. You know, it could be the weather, whatever. It could be a million different things. But if you look at the long statistical tail before and then the head afterward, you start looking at what the trend is. And the whole point is, if the trend is going up and then suddenly there's a drop, it's more persuasive that you've bucked the trend and that your intention has actually had an effect. So Dr. Utz looked at that. She'll be looking at our American peace intention experiment we ran in the beginning of September and October. And she'll be looking at this Middle Eastern experiment most likely. Now, as I say, most cases we do it for 6 to 8 days. In the beginning of October, I ran a peace intention experiment to lower violence in St. Louis, Missouri for 6 days. And again, we show the same effect on Roger Nelson's equipment. We're still waiting for the data, and then Jessica Utz will do her work to look at the statistics for that. For the Middle Eastern experiment, now, I want to explain why I did both this and the American one and the Middle Eastern and peace experiment by way of going back to something I did for the 10th anniversary of 9/11. I was pretty sick of watching those buildings coming down every year on TV on the anniversary of 9/11. And I thought, you know, maybe we need a better symbol than this to move on. So I thought, let's do a peace intention experiment. And I speak all around the world, and usually I'm hosted by various people. And one of the people that has hosted me in the Middle East is a guy called Dr. Salah Al-Rashid. Now, he is like the Deepak Chopra of the Middle East. He is an amazing guy. He's from a prominent family, and he has spent his life bringing personal development to the Middle East. And he hosts some people like me. And he also is a best-selling author himself, well-known everywhere. You can't walk down the street in Kuwait and not have people all over him wanting his autograph. So I asked him to partner with me all on this because he's got thousands of followers all through the Gulf states, the Arab states. And I then invited my own audience from around the world, as I'll call them, my Western audience, even though they're from around the world, to all come together and send an intention. We decided to 2 southern provinces in Afghanistan. And we chose the places that were basically the Taliban stronghold. So we started out with Dr. Al-Rashid apologizing for 9/11. And then we apologized for our outsized response to 9/11, because most people don't know that about 100,000 innocent Arabs got killed, detained, injured, or deported with the Afghanistan and Iraqi wars. So we did all of that, and then we all sent intention to these provinces. Now, here's the interesting thing that happened. We looked at NATO data, and we analyzed it, and yes, the trend was completely bucked, and there was an unprecedented lowering of violence in those two southern provinces as compared to some of the other provinces for that time period. And it was very persuasive. This is information from a German general as part of the combined forces, so they're pretty accurate. But that wasn't the interesting part of the story. The interesting part of the story came with the broadcasts I was doing about this. The participants from the Arab states and the participants from the Western states started instant messaging each other, and they started Facebooking each other. And I noticed they were starting to befriend each other and write things like, "Your God is my God," "We're brothers from the other side," "You'll always be in our hearts." And they started forgiving each other for 9/11. It was really remarkable. So the big thought I had was, for the American Peace Experiment, I chose St. Louis because it is officially the most violent city in America. And maybe we'll lower violence. We'll get the data soon. But more importantly, I surveyed the participants, as I have always, and their lives are becoming more peaceful. So the big idea was that their lives and that peace effect on the thousands of participants that were part of this will ripple out into America. And here's a really interesting bit of data from the University of California at Berkeley. When you're involved in some sort of altruistic enterprise, let's say, really interesting biological things happen in your body. It activates a thing called the vagus nerve, which is the longest nerve in your body that starts at the base of the neck, and it winds its way through all of the major organs. And it also activates all of those elements involved in caretaking, like the release of oxytocin, the love hormone, and lots of other things involved in caretaking. And what is also evident is that it helps in the release of or activation of elements of your body that make you more tolerant, more accepting of the other. So that certainly happened in my 9/11 peace experiment. And I kept thinking, well, wouldn't that be great if there were a couple of Republicans as well as Democrats on this enterprise who start becoming more tolerant of the other, and where that radiates out into their life, maybe that will make an even bigger difference than whether we lower violence in St. Louis. So that was the whole idea of the Middle Eastern experiment too. And for this one, this was quite brilliant because I was giving a summit teleclass through Dr. Al-Rashid in a studio he has in Southern England. And this has the capability of having 9 different screens. It's brilliant. And so he had it set up so we had audiences from 8 Muslim countries, and they would be gathered in a hotel conference suite. And there was a camera there and also a big screen for them. So I could see them, and they could ask questions, and they could see me on a big screen. And they could see the other people from the other countries too. So everybody could talk to everybody else when called on by me. So the ingenious thing about this system was that it's a studio with 9 screens attached to, each screen is attached to a hotel room suite in one of a hotel conference room suite in one of 8 Arab countries. So there's a camera in there so that the participants in that country can see me, and I'm on a big screen, and I can see them via a camera, and they can ask questions, and we can talk to each other, and they can also talk to people in the other screens too, so when called on by me. So it's very interactive. So what we did is we had people from these 8 Arab cities that, you know, from Abu Dhabi and Saudi Arabia and Bahrain and Oman and Jordan and Tunisia. I mean, it's quite amazing. And then we also had a screen in an auditorium with an audience that was Israeli. So we decided this time our target was going to be the old city of Jerusalem, because the old city of Jerusalem was really symbolic. It belongs to everyone, despite what Donald Trump says. It belongs to everyone and it belongs to no one, because of course it is the seat of at least 3 of the world's religions, 4 if you count Armenian Christianity too. But there is, of course, the Wailing Wall for the Jews. There is the Dome of the Rock for the Muslims. There is the Way of the Cross for the Christians, and a number of other very important, you know, iconic elements of Christianity there too. So we set intention to lower violence around the Damascus Gate, which has been the scene of a lot of violence since there's been enhanced security from the Israelis. So we did this, and we all joined together. And this was just a single day intention. But here's the interesting thing that happened. Afterward, the Arabs started sending love and forgiveness to the Israelis, and the Israelis kept saying things like, "Your God is my God. We should have done this before." And they were blowing kisses and they were crying and they were just extending incredible love to each other. Once again, that situation of becoming more tolerant of the other. And everyone vowed to do it again. People contacted each other on my Facebook pages. It was really remarkable. So we'll measure afterward. You know, we were going to just measure a field effect. Maybe we'll look at violence too. But with Trump now wading into this, and the Arabs are, of course, furious, because for them, it's also their holy land too. And they had a part of it beforehand, the part that also has the Dome of the Rock. I mean, it's really one of the most sacred places for them too. So I'm going to make a suggestion to for this time. I'm going to ask, and of course, the people had to sign up, so I have the whole list of the people who took part. I want to ask the Arabs to send an intention for their the Jewish participants, and I want the Jewish participants to send a positive intention to the Arabs, and send an intention for fairness and peace. We don't want to wade in with any kind of politics, but fairness is a really important point here about intention, because I've done a lot of work on everybody's need for fairness. It's really inherent in human beings. We're very generous, but we expect other people to be generous back. And when they don't, when they aren't, it's really especially infuriating. So I think the whole idea of generosity and fairness, and the idea that both sides have legitimacy here, you know, I mean, if you ask, I read a wonderful story about some Arabs and Israelis who were together in a part of a workshop, and they were asked to write what their take on the birth of Israel was. And of course, the Israelis wrote, "The historic and amazing day of independence," and wrote about all how wonderful it was that they'd finally been, their homeland was finally recognized as theirs. And the Arabs wrote about the unprecedented disaster when many of them lost their homes and were, you know, evacuated, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, the terrible thing and the point of it carrying on is that both sides are right. And so it's about peace and fairness. So I will send, maybe, who knows how the universe works in many ways, very mysterious ways. Maybe the whole thing with Donald Trump has been thrown in as a little bomb to start resolving things. Maybe this is part of the intention. When we did this intention for Sri Lanka, it was really amazing, because during that time, during the 8 days we sent intention, violence actually quadrupled. I was really terrified. I thought, oh my God, we've done this. And then it plummeted to levels that were far below what it had been before after we were finished. But when we looked later, something really interesting happened. That very week we did intention, the government, which had been essentially losing the war, won a number of decisive battles that enabled it within a few months to recapture the entire North, which had been held by rebel forces. And so they opened up something that hadn't been opened up for years. And then within a few months after that, this 25-year, totally intractable war was done. It was over. It ended in a bloody finish, but it ended. So when we looked,
that's the first thing I thought of when I heard the news about Donald Trump, was that experiment and what happened.
Yes,
And
yes. I don't know, but the
could,
point is, yeah, maybe it's a catalyst for something. But the point is, when we looked back at all of that data, the very week we sent intention proved to be probably pivotal, I guess one of the most important in the entire course of that 25-year war. So who knows how this is going to unfold?
yeah.
But we'll continue to send intention for peace and the prevention of any kind of violence.
So what website should they go to? LynneMcTaggart.com to get information, or the intention? You have a number of websites.
They're all rolled into one now, which is LynneMcTaggart.com. Okay. So the intention experiment, all of those are now on LynneMcTaggart.com.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. So there's so many places I want to go, and we're more than halfway through the show here. I do want to get into the quantum perspective and retro intention and some of those spooky things, because they're just so amazing. But I think, what do you call it? The power up. I think you mentioned some of those things, but to help people understand how to put together a group of 8 or 12 and to power up, and the specifics of holding an intention and how they can find out more to create these groups. We're doing it here in British Columbia, you know. I haven't
Great.
But we are.
Great. Wonderful. Well, first of all, I want to say a couple of things. Most of the information about how to power up is in my book, The Power of 8 now, and how to form your own intention group is in my book, The Power of 8. For people who don't have 7 other people around them that they can call on, it works just as well virtually. I mean, I run year-long intention master classes. I'm running one at the end of January, where I work with people for 7 weeks in a teleclass, and then I put them into groups of 8 or so, and I monitor them for the year, and I give them all kinds of challenges, and I have them meet weekly with their groups, and they have amazing transformations. I studied one in 2015. I studied a whole group of 250 people just to see. You know, I'd known a lot about how they could physically heal through these Power of 8 groups, but I wondered if everything in their lives would heal. So I did just that, and I watched them week after week after week. I had them fill out forms about their health and their relationships and their life's purpose and their career and finances. And I have to say, of the people who met every week, week after week after week, that was about 150. Virtually 100% of them had major life transformations. We had a guy who had lifelong depression, and he got over all of that. He's filled with joy now. We had a woman who had 15-year chronic fatigue, and she's lifting weights now. We had amazing people finding their dream jobs, having incredible financial windfalls when they needed it, having all kinds of things like that, finding new career prospects or new startups, creating entrepreneurial startups and having success with them, et cetera, and a lot of people falling back in love in their lives again. So we found all of that. But here's the big point I want to get to. Most of those people who consider the people in their group, their intention family now, their new family, have never actually met. These people meet virtually on Skype or Google Hangouts or Zoom. So they've never actually met, and yet they are as close to these people as anyone. And these intentions work whether or not you're together or you're just connected on a telephone. And I've seen that too, or a telephone or a computer. So if you don't have a group of 8 around or 7 to work with, we have a section of my website, which is lynnmctaggart.com/forum, which is a place devoted just for Power of 8 groups. And you can put out there, hey, I'm in this time zone and I'd like 7 other people, or you can join one of the thousands of existing groups that doesn't have 8 people yet. So check that out, and you'll find your own intention family.
Okay, I want to jump into another world. I love that, and I want people to do that, and I want them to get the power of 8. But I want to look at the new story, because if I look at all of these things that are happening, from climate change, political unrest, war, inequality, all of these things, at the heart of that is the myth of separation, that somehow we're separate. And that's a product of the Newtonian Cartesian mechanistic model that says we're separate, that there's a cause and effect, that everything can be figured out by going to the past, versus the quantum view of everything is inseparable and causes something to happen to everything else, that it's not deterministic, that it's what do I want to say? You can't figure out what's going to happen. The observer effect and all of those things that impact that. And, that's such a different worldview that it's hard for us to get our head around it, because language, from my perspective, language is one of the culprits. It contains it. It's built into our language, this mechanistic perspective. So how do you get into that with what you're doing and get people to somehow begin to experience and be able to, understand things like non-locality, or what's the word I'm trying to think, the
interconnectedness?
Well, interconnectedness, but when something happens pre-intention.
Oh, precognition.
Precognition. Or when you can go back in time too. And
retro-intention.
Retro-intention, that's what I was trying to think of. Retro.
Yeah.
It's like, that's the spooky stuff. Can we talk a little bit about that? And
Sure.
On it?
First of all, yeah. I mean, I think the discoveries in quantum physics and some of the new biology and a variety of other things that make us realize that we are profoundly interconnected, that we are something a lot grander than chemicals and electrical signaling, that our thoughts are not just locked inside our heads, and that consciousness is all pervasive and unified. When we know all of that, that changes everything. It just means that the way we've been living our lives, according to this old scientific story, is really out of date. We think of science as this absolute finite truth, but science is just a story. And every so often new discoveries essentially override the discoveries we've had before. And some of these latest discoveries definitely indicate we're not as separate as we thought we were. In fact, we're, as I say, from the smallest subatomic particles of our being to our bodies and its environment to ourselves and everyone with whom we come into contact, there is a bond. And by bond, I mean a connection so integral and profound, it's impossible to say where one thing ends and another thing begins. Now, I wrote about this in my book, The Bond, because it was really an answer to Darwin and saying, we were completely wrong about this whole idea of survival of the fittest. We are so interconnected, we only thrive when we live according to those kinds of rules. So that book was really all about new tools for a new world vision. And it did provide a lot of those kinds of tools in the sense of learning much more interconnected ways of relating to each other. And so I think there's that. There's also, as you asked me, these weird, spooky action things where we discover that we are far grander than we've been told, because we have the capacity to gather information out of time and to affect things out of time. I mean, I play around with retrointention a lot with my workshop people. Oftentimes, I ask them to go back to a moment in their lives that was a defining moment in terms of restriction, something that happened to them that convinced them they weren't good at something, or they weren't good enough, or something like that. Whether it was the math teacher that told them they were dumb in math, to somebody who indicated they were unlovable or rejected them. In some way, something that has really caused them to carry on feeling restricted, or some point where they really decided they just didn't have enough money and they never would. And we go back there and we rewrite the story, basically. We have a new conversation with the math teacher, or we have we rewrite that script essentially and send an intention to change that. And in many cases, while it may not change what happened back then, we don't know, it could. What it does change is that whole thread of information and connection that person has, and oftentimes that all improves. And I've seen it over and over again, resolution of something by just going back in time. And this isn't as far-fetched as it seems. I mean, there's a huge body of evidence showing that time is very elastic when it comes to intention. There's a whole body of evidence showing that the future decisions affect the present as it's unfolding. Is very, very bizarre, but there's all kinds of violations of so-called causation all the time in the science.
Yeah, it's really amazing. I had a couple of shows ago, I had Irvin Laszlo on, and of course I thought of your book, The Field, because we were talking a lot about time in the field, and one of the things, you mentioned Darwin and the competitive thing, and how much that's, particularly in the American psyche, is so inbred in it.
Yes.
And yet, cooperation is really what coherence is, in a way. The whole concept of implicit and explicit coherence, which we're decoherent in the human race in both areas, obviously, but that there's a field of consciousness that isn't in the brain, that it is a field that we are feeding and being fed by at the same time, that has a purpose. And I love that. And the purpose, of course, being coherence or unity consciousness. Can you talk about how that relates to the intention experiments?
Well, I mean, first of all, we found that with our intention experiment, that there is a sort of psychic internet that gets created between minds when we do it. Remember, when we're doing our intention experiments, most people are participating individually with their computer screen. So they're connecting with all of these other people via these computer screens. Nevertheless, they report consistently, thousands of them, unbearable almost electricity. Many of them are crying uncontrollably. They feel, goosebumps up and down their arms. They feel a palpable sense of energy coming from their computer. And it's not just their computer getting hot. It's energy. I've had it so many times when I'm participating in one of my own experiments that, I have to step away from the computer. It's so powerful. Also, the effect at a distance. And to give you an example of this, let me tell you about one of my favorite experiments from the intention experiments. In this set of experiments, and we worked with the University of Arizona, Dr. Gary Schwartz and his laboratory, we set up a very rigorous study of seeds, trying to send intention to make seeds grow faster. So we had 4 sets of 30 seeds each, and they were in a little tray, and they took photos of all 4 sets of seeds and sent them to us. And I then whenever I was speaking somewhere, would invite my audience to send intention to one of the sets of seeds. And the scientists, when I was done, I would tell them we were done. Let's say we chose seeds A. We wouldn't tell the scientists which seeds we chose. They would plant all 4 sets of seeds, and then they'd measure them 5 days later. And only when they were done would I tell them which seeds we'd sent intention to. So the first time we ran this, we were in Sydney, Australia. I had an audience of 700 in Sydney. We sent intention to those seeds. The seeds are sitting in a lab in Tucson, Arizona, 8,000 miles away. Nevertheless, we had an effect. The seeds grew higher than all the 3 controls. And in fact, this happened every single time we ran this study. We ran it 12 times, and every single time the seeds sent intention grew higher than controls. So if you just unpack this for a second, we are, first of all, 8,000 miles away. Nevertheless, our consciousness had an effect on those seeds. Secondly, we're not sending intention to the seeds themselves. We sent intention to a symbol of the seeds. We sent intention to a photographic representation of these seeds. Nevertheless, we had an effect on the seeds. So that suggests something really amazing about consciousness and its ability to zero in on a target through this essentially psychic internet. And that would demonstrate to us that, we are in a field of connection, and that we have that ability through this powerful thing we call consciousness to affect aspects anywhere in the world at any moment.
What that's bringing up for me, and the question I was just writing down, is what stops us from connecting with this? This is, of course, a huge thing for me. I talk a lot about language and how we're locked into the language that's the to be verbs that keep us stuck, without any time. That this is the way I am. This is this way, and we project that out onto people, including our children, and say, you're never going to be good at math, or those things. And then they have that wave collapse kind of thing happen. And the rest of their life is that they're not good at that thing. What can people do to begin to practice, in a way, this interconnection, interbeing, as Thich Nhat Hanh calls it, with each other, to train ourselves out of the mechanistic paradigm?
Oh gosh, that's such a big question, Michael. I mean, I think first of all, on intention, we can understand that our minds, our thoughts are extraordinarily powerful, not only for ourselves, but for everyone around us. And I, teach a whole thing about becoming much more conscious, as I say, of what you're thinking all the time, what you're intending inadvertently, and what you're intending for other people in the script you're writing for them too. That's one thing, and understanding that positive intention, particularly as magnified by a small group of 8, can have a powerful, amazing effect in changing those aspects of your lives and changing that script. There is also a really important point here about intentional relationships. When you say, how do we change from our separate and competitive mindset? Well, we have to learn some real fundamental things about not having it have to be I win, you lose all the time. That's our zero, our life is zero-sum game. We think, and it's so embedded in our consciousness that we have to be, we have to outstrip everyone else academically. We have to outstrip everyone else competitively in every regard. And other than the sports field, I can't see why that is necessary, but that's been so built into us. So I really work very much on intention for the other. I mean, we started out this conversation with the whole thing of it having a mirror effect. And one of the things I've been really fascinated by is the power of altruistic intention. How, I work with people all the time and say, get off of yourself. When you get off of yourself and you start intending for someone else, your life starts working. And there's huge reasons for this. Altruism is like a bulletproof vest. I mean, there was a wonderful study that I relay in The Power of 8 of this priest who's also a psychologist who wanted to see if prayer could work for mental illness, not just physical illness, because there's a lot of good studies showing prayer works with physical illness. So he got 400 people with depression and got them together and divided the group in half. And 200 of them were going to be people receiving prayer, and the other 200 were people who were going to be doing the praying. So afterward, he measured them on all kinds of psychological indicators to see how they did. And it was really amazing. The people who got prayer all did better. They were improving, but not as much by any means as the people who were doing the praying. They were off the charts. They were doing really well. And that, you see that in every regard in all the scientific studies. People live longer, are happier, are healthier in every regard when they do get off themselves and start doing for other people in any regard. And I've seen this in my own intention work over and over and over again. The people who are stuck, when they stop intending for themselves and they start intending for someone else, they also get amazing riches, and right away, dream jobs fall in their laps the next week. It's really quite amazing.
The prayer of St. Francis, it's in giving that we receive.
Well, you know, it's a Hallmark card. I know, we know this, do unto others. I mean, it's a Hallmark card, but we think of it as, oh, wouldn't that be a nice thing to do? You know, and I'll do that when I'm not so worried about myself. My point is, you know, it shouldn't be all about, we're so focused on self-help, but it really needs to be other help. And that is what really provides, you know, I'm not just saying this really does work. It really provides an amazing mirror effect.
One of the things that you've both experimented with and quoted other people is the whole idea of negative intention and the power, how much it's even more powerful in some ways than positive intention. And when I look at the news and I look at how focused we are on what's wrong and how many of the people that I work with are living inside of these complaints that are about them. Talk about negative intention and how much, how people can start to catch their complaints even, or their thoughts are things that are often creating more negativity.
Well, as I say, one of the little things that I do in my workshops is have people start monitoring everything they're thinking for a week. And, you know, they're shocked to see how much negativity is in that for the entire week. You know, it's pretty much 80-20. And, you know, most of that negativity is directed toward themselves. You know, look how you muffed that one. God, I have a bad hair day today. You know, do I look fat in this? And et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then they have loads of judgments about everyone else. So one of the things that I ask them to do, as I say, aside from this monitoring of what they're doing, is also creating a kind of an intention. I don't want to say bulletproof vest, because it isn't a bulletproof vest. It's not a shield, but an intention grounder for themselves. I was really influenced by, you know, as you say, intention doesn't have a morality. It works just as well with negative intention as positive intention. I mean, luckily, you need a certain amount of coherent thought to do a good intention, and most people who are negative aren't very coherent. So that's one good thing in terms of mass, you know, negative effects. I mean, we see there have been powerful negative intenders like Hitler. He was very powerful, and he managed to convince an entire country to follow him, or at least many, many elements of that country to follow him. But when we're besieged with negative intention, there's a really simple thing you can do. And a lot of people wonder about, you know, how do I stay away from self-sabotage, and how do I prevent myself from being affected by other negative intentions coming toward me? And one person I was really impressed by is a guy called Dr. John Diamond, who really essentially invented behavioral kinesiology. Now, most people know what muscle testing is. You know, when you've got somebody standing in front of you and they try to push down your arm, and you put a noxious substance on them and your arm goes weak. If you are allergic to something, you know, your arm goes weak. And that's a way of testing people's allergies and a variety of other and illnesses. But it also works with toxic thoughts. If you say to somebody, your mother doesn't love you, boom, your alarm will go down. Or that neighbor you can't stand is at the door, boof. Or your car has a flat tire, boof. Anything like that, negative intention, your arm will go weak too. But one thing, and Dr. Diamond has tested this over and over thousands of times, the one thought that keeps your arm strong no matter what's thrown at you is the thought of what you were put on this earth to do. Now, that doesn't have to be being president of the United States or any lofty ambition or career. It can be, being a great parent. It can be being a fabulous gardener. Usually it's an activity that sort of puts you in touch with the divine, singing, music, baking the perfect chocolate cake, whatever it is that really puts you in touch with the divine, that makes you lose track of time, makes you feel just so good to your bones. That activity is your homing thought, as he called it. And using that homing thought, you just hold on to that, and that can really protect you from anything coming at you.
Brilliant. Well, Lynn, I know it's getting late in London and we're getting to the end of the show. Any last thing you'd like to tell our listeners that we might not have covered today?
No, just organize a Power of 8 group, read my book for much more information about what to do, join my website, lynnmctaggart.com, to find out more about how to create and lynnmctaggart.com/forum to create your Power of 8 group virtually. And also, if you want to join a masterclass, we're running one on January 27th. Check my Facebook page, Lynne McTaggart 2011, for more information, or my website about how to join up. Thanks so much.
One of the things that I know that really helps us to ground and make a difference is gratitude. And I'm just so grateful for the years of work you've done, your books that I've thoroughly enjoyed, and just your tireless commitment to bringing more peace, more connection, more love into the world. Lynne McTaggart, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. It's been a joy to be with you.
Likewise.